the era we're moving into with generative AI poses the question of, well, instead of having a design system where you're enforcing conformity or consistency, what if we got to a place where we recognize the diversity of every individual, right? My background, my history, my understanding, the way I interact with you, my geography, all of those things make me unique. So why would you speak to me in exactly the same way as, let's say, my 20-year-old daughter who lives in a geography and has a different background? What if the future goal of design systems plus generative AI equals the impossibility of creating the same interface twice?
There's already some tweaking that I'm seeing in the personality of the software experiences we have. How does that fundamentally change how product development works?
When we think about the currency, the focus, the principles of design, we have to continue to have excellence in craft in the details, for sure. Pixels and atoms matter, right? But with generative AI, you see a powerful set of tools that can do a lot of the tactics of design, layout, color choices, grid, interface, etc. And it really shifts the conversation away from what I would say the more tangible or superficial layers of design to go deeper into the strategic, cultural, ethics, principles aspects of design.
What does strategic design leadership really mean in this era of AI, especially with augmentation?
For current chief design officers or design executives, they're continually trying to find opportunities to speak the language of design beyond just how the business thinks of design as, oh, you're just that team that makes stuff look good, right? Like product will tell you what to do, right? Like there's all these misconceptions about design. And design leaders now have an opportunity to insert themselves into conversations at the strategic level.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited today to welcome Dan Makoski to the DXC stage as we continue to explore design executive perspectives on AI. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Gordon. Glad to be here.
So glad to have you here. Just to introduce you a little bit, Dan Makoski is currently a chief design advisor, but he was formerly chief design officer at UnitedHealth Group, Lloyd's Banking Group, and also serving as a head of design at Walmart. Dan, it's so wonderful to have you here. Where are you calling us from?
I am in Oxfordshire in a converted chapel in the heart of the UK, where I've been for the last 7 years. But I'm a global advisor, so I have clients in the US and Europe and travel quite a bit.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, your background and the intersections of design and AI. Tell us a little bit about your journey with it so far. And, we'll kind of end it off there about how AI is impacting your everyday life and your usage of those tools. So let's kick it off from there so we can get to know you a little bit.
Great. Well, I came into design because of my fascination with the intersection of technology and design. So I, in the 90s, was really fascinated with this thing called HTML, when a lot of designers, like my graphic designer father and folks, were kind of in a different mindset. I was really excited about bringing a design perspective to this new disruptive medium, several decades ago. And I've stayed through with that focus at companies like Microsoft and at Google of bringing a human-centered design into software and then hardware. And then ultimately over the last decade, I've been working in places like you mentioned in the world of healthcare and banking to think not just about apps but around entire experiences and environments, like a bank branch, for example. And in that capacity, I've gone from being a senior individual contributor, working on individual, things, to leading teams of 500-600 designers and kind of unlocking an organization's capacity for deeper creativity and empathy. And so I'm super excited about AI because I use it personally every day. I'm using it to drive storytelling projects at the moment for a CEO in the healthcare space, or the health research space. And I'm also seeing it have this tectonic shift in the design industry about pushing all of designers at all levels of seniority to really push their thinking and champion a human-centered perspective, because now more than ever, it's desperately needed.
What sort of tools are you using every day?
Well, ChatGPT, of course, is on all my devices. I use it every day. Um, I'm using Gemini more and more as Google has started to integrate its own, large language model chatbot interface through the Google environment. And that's actually pretty cool to see that integration. One thing now that I'm managing my own business, I don't have a CFO. I don't have a COO as a part of my team anymore. So I'll just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, here's a bunch of statements. Can you give me this kind of information back? And I can quickly work with tax preparation, for example. Just yesterday was something I was working on. On the storytelling front, I'm using a lot of Descript, which is an AI-powered video editing tool for things like eye correction. So often when we record scientists, they're looking maybe away or at a script. And so we'll do things like use AI to change eye contact so people look right into the camera. Or studio sound AI with Descript, where poorly captured audio will sound like it's from a studio with the press of a button using a lot of AI. So it's not just kind of text ChatGPT, but it's a lot of visual and editing things that would take an editor hours of craft to do that now can happen with technology in a new way.
Knowing that you can do these things now, you have your hands in more than just one thing. How would you kind of characterize the current zeitgeist around AI? There's certainly spectrums of narratives and sentiments. Any analogies and parallels to help make sense of how you make sense of today's society?
It's a really good question. I mean, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology in general. So I get excited with the rise of generative AI and beyond it, thoughts about iterative AI. And, the essential thing of AI, we often forget about it. We just kind of go with this 2-letter acronym. But when you think really about that whole phrase, artificial intelligence, the artificial bit is kind of like my Silicon Valley roots. I was surrounded by a lot of tech innovators and engineers who were so excited about the artificial bit, the tech, the capability part of it. And as a designer, I'm really much more interested about balancing that conversation with the conversation on intelligence. Like, what is intelligence? What does it mean to be sentient, conscious, human, useful? And the question about AI is really the essential question at the heart of all human-centered design activities, which is how do we use and engage with technology in more human, simple, understandable ways? Because we've struggled as a species for, decades or more in trying to figure out the language of computers. Remember command line interfaces and DOS, and remember, Xerox PARC. It took a sociologist, Tim Mott, to ask the question of people who didn't know about technology to say, how do you want to use personal computers? That led to what he called the office schematic, which is essentially the desktop metaphor. And it was the rise of, the Apple first personal computers that use that new metaphor that allowed technology to be more human and simple. Now, that was 74. That's about the year I was born. That was 50 years ago. We're now in another era of thinking about the power of computing, but the questions still emerge of if you're managing your money, or if you're managing your health, or if you're managing your books, whatever it is, it's still really hard. The language of banking is not human-centered. The language of technology often is still not human-centered. And so what I love about the AI conversation is it actually shines a spotlight on the imbalance of the over-focus on just tech conversations to the detriment of the conversation around people, society, ethics, inclusion, diversity, etc. And so we now have an opportunity as design leaders to accelerate that because it's needed in this fearful and exciting age of generative AI.
It's so interesting you're drawing that history when I think back to Xerox PARC versus today. How do you kind of characterize your vision? You're mentioning there's ethics and diversity and accessibility. So I'm hearing hints of your vision for AI. But how is it actually being implemented today versus how we should actually go about it? Like, what are those step changes and differences?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the interfaces, particularly in software design and in enterprise design, have had this model, this implicit understanding of what I would say DIY. It's do it yourself. Like, you got to figure it out, right? Like, And there's conventions of like, well, there's a toolbar and sometimes there's a hamburger menu or there's a floating action button, or we have all of these design systems with all these pieces and parts. But ultimately, you, as someone who is using software for whatever purpose, you have to figure it out. And we've all had people in our family of various ages, young or old or otherwise, who rely on us as essentially the family IT consultant to guide them through these. It's not always easy. And I think we're imagining with generative AI an interaction model that's different. It's not, hey, here's a set of buttons essentially and functions. You go ahead and use them if you want to. It's actually, what if that interface went away? What if you could just talk to Lloyd's Bank, let's say, where I was chief design officer? What if you can just talk to Lloyd's and say, hey, I've got a question for you. How much do I spend every week on groceries? Right? There's no buttons, there's no interface. And what's really powerful about that is it gives you the opportunity to interact with the power of computing in more natural ways. And what I love about that is now we've seen one interface, the chatbot or the chat interface through ChatGPT, right? And that's powerful. But there's so many other ways that human beings can connect with computing. There are all kinds of metaphors. There's objects and gestures. There's voice, of course. There's body language and posture. Like, what would it look like for a generative AI interface if you're at a bank signing up for a credit card in front of a kiosk and it senses that you're getting confused or you're furrowing your brow? Like, maybe it simplifies the choices in real time to generate an interface for you, whether it's text or words. What if you're squinting? Maybe the text automatically gets larger. Like, I'm so excited about a future where we have an adaptive experience, clearly in software, but maybe also in physical environments and hardware, that serves us, that helps us with our needs.
I think that's so interesting because I think most software experiences we experience every day is pretty much a click-based, singular kind of experience. It's one-dimensional, more or less. But I think what you're hinting at is I'm almost imagining this humanness from technology that can read body language, how we're feeling, and what sort of predictive experiences they can offer, right, to enhance inclusion and accessibility. So that's an interesting angle of, I think what I'm hearing from you is, what is that frontier of net new experience layers that we as design executives and companies can orchestrate?
So interesting, because this shift is pushing our thinking around everything in design. Like, take a design system as an example, right? If you go back a couple of decades, you didn't have this thing called a design system, right? There was the beginning of it with the Apple Human Interface Guidelines around just how to use icons and windows and menus and pointer. But that's really only accelerated in the last decade, where modern self-respecting companies, particularly in the digital space, will have a design system to really make sure that they're spending their precious design time not on repeatably creating the same experiences at all different times teams have to solve, like basic navigation or sign in or whatever it is, but they're spending their precious design time on the unique things that maybe haven't been figured out or aren't part of the design system. And so I would say that this era, first of all, it's, do we need a design system? Second era is, you have one. Okay, now how do I make everything consistent and really push it to iOS, Android, web, et cetera, et cetera? The era we're moving into with generative AI poses the question of, well, instead of having a design system where you're enforcing conformity or consistency, what if we got to a place where we recognize the diversity of every individual, right? My background, my history, my understanding, the way I interact with you, my geography, all of those things make me unique. So why would you speak to me in exactly the same way as, let's say, my 20-year-old daughter who lives in a different geography and has a different background? What if the future goal of design systems plus generative AI equals the impossibility of creating the same interface twice? Because if you just take 2 or 3 variables about you, what I know about you, like when my daughter signs into her banking account, why wouldn't it say, "What's up, girl?" Like how her brothers would, like, I mean, that's maybe inappropriate. But like with me, it would say, "Good morning, Daniel." It's more formal, and it's like, why doesn't the language adapt? Why doesn't the interface adapt? Why aren't things larger for me and more readable?
Even to that point about adaptive experiences, I think about even with ChatGPT, you can kind of
Yeah.
customize what voice and personality you want. Like, do you want a British guy talking to you? Do you want an American lady talking? So it's like there's already some tweaking that I'm seeing in the personality of the software experiences we have. And I think you're hinting at, like, across industries, how does that get used and deployed, right? I was going to say, how does that fundamentally change how product development works?
We've entered an age of experience decades ago. I mean, I was there as a member of the American Institute of Graphic Arts, AIGA, when they coined the term, the experience design group. And now we have the word UX, user experience or customer experience, as a part of our language. And that was a huge shift because it oriented designers away from artifacts and defining ourselves by, I'm an industrial designer, I create products, or I'm an architect and I create buildings, or I'm a, graphic or software designer, interaction designer who creates digital stuff. I think designing for experience means we're actually designing for something that is beyond an artifact. It's an experience, which Dr. Liz Sanders would define as a moment in time at the intersection of our memories from the past and our dreams for the future. And it's actually, as a designer, it's not even an experience that I have. It's an experience that someone else has. And so when we think about the currency, the focus, the principles of design, we have to continue to have excellence in craft in the details, for sure. Pixels and atoms matter, right? But with generative AI, you see a powerful set of tools that can do a lot of the tactics of design, layout, color choices, grid, interface, etc. And it really shifts the conversation away from what I would say the more tangible or superficial layers of design to go deeper into the strategic, cultural, ethics, principles aspects of design. And these are critical. So when, for example, Lloyd's Banking Group, or as chief design officer, had a mission of helping Britain prosper, if that's really their mission, then the design activities aren't about taking a logo and a color palette from marketing and just making sure it's consistent across apps. It's about, what does it mean to prosper? What does prosperity mean to ordinary families in the UK? How do we use behavioral science, generative AI, adaptive systems to have a unique conversation with them in many ways, the way that a banker would have had hundreds of years ago with your family, right, adapting to you? It's like we're having this moment where we're rethinking industries in a way that becomes even more human with technology, ironically.
It makes me think about how much of your past time as a design leader was spent on, those really nitty gritty decisions that hopefully through these tools actually enables us to spend more time on strategic design conversations with your CEOs, with your, cross-functional partners. And because I think about even the mundane today of you using all sorts of tools, myself included, to save time, to increase the spaces of where we can add strategic value add. But now if we replicate that same idea to leaders at large, how does that create more space on people's calendars for more meaningful gathering moments, right? For more critical conversations. So that's kind of what you got me thinking about right now as we're thinking about what does strategic design leadership really mean in this era of AI, especially with augmentation.
I love that. I mean, one very tangible example is in the year plus that I've kind of retired from the corporate executive life of having hundreds of designers, and I'm now, a free agent. I kind of missed having my executive assistant and design office. So for the last year, my assistant has been an AI tool. I'm using Clara Labs, and Clara is essentially an email agent that I just loop Clara Thomas at uplifting.design into my thread, and she'll just go back and forth with whoever I'm trying to meet with and find a space to meet. And I've kind of trained her with some rules of like it's whatever, it's tech, with like, well, if we say breakfast and I'm in London, then here's the spot I like. Or if it's a video conference, I prefer Google Meet, but I can use whatever, and here's my account. So most people don't know that my actual assistant that reflects my brand isn't a human being. And sometimes people have hit on her or have it's interesting. And it's freed up my time to not have to deal with the inevitable 5 or 6 back and forth things. So that to me as a symbol has been one example of how you can pull AI into your world to elevate your focus. Because for me, when I'm a one person show, I don't have the time to spend on those things, right? I really need to focus my precious time now on, what matters. And I think in the world, for example, for current chief design officers or design executives, they're continually trying to find opportunities to speak the language of design beyond just how the business thinks of design as, oh, you're just that team that makes stuff look good, right? Like product will tell you what to do, right? Like there's all these misconceptions about design. And design leaders now have an opportunity to insert themselves into conversations at the strategic level. One example, when we had a chief data officer. So you can imagine, instead of a chief data officer, chief AI or chief tech officer working on generative AI, they were working on data ethics in the way that, we already covered GDPR and kind of risk and the functional aspects of how we deal with data, but there were questions around ethics. Like, if we know there's certain patterns in your life, and you're actually spending money in certain places that are related to kind of gambling, and we know that your basic balance, that this is potentially addictive and potentially destructive, we have, a relationship with the Financial Conduct Authority that says, well, you have to kind of prevent harm to people in society and families. But also we want to allow people to, if you want to spend your extra money on gambling, who are we to judge, right? So like there are ethical questions that come up even before the generative AI. And now that there's even generative AI giving often incorrect or incomplete answers, like a lot of my time using generative AI and ChatGPT is not just, oh, hey, here's a bunch of statements, put them together into one, so I have this integrated view across my finances. It's actually, did it work? And I'm like, hey, you didn't, what the heck? It didn't actually work. And I have to then spend all this extra time. So there are ethical questions that start to raise because AI responds to you often in very confident ways where it feels like it's accurate, but it's actually wrong. And when challenged, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, actually, it's not working.
I almost wish there was a sort of confidence or accuracy score next to the response now that you say about it. Thinking back to your time as a corporate design executive, now, I know that was, just a few years back, but if you think about the current state of AI tools available to you, how do you kind of see that job evolving? Because we're now talking about what is that evolving role of the design executive in this age? Help us understand that a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when I, had teams at scale, so hundreds of designers, we started to, first of all, think about an organizational strategy that was much different than smaller companies. Smaller companies don't have the scale to have the luxury of being able to think about how they really think about all the various nuances of design skills. And design, like technology, is a big area, and there's lots of areas of expertise in it, right? And I think that we had created 9 guilds of design, including visual design, interaction design, design strategy, design operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of those areas, or the ones that were at least understood by the business, tended to be the ones that were more like the user experience design group that, was a little bit more understandable, or the interaction design group that worked on flows and interactions that were maybe not as tangible as visual and UX design, but okay, I could kind of figure out the complexity of that flow. A lot of those kind of activities are actually going to be taken over by AI. Like, I remember when I was a kid and my dad had a graphic design studio, the tools that were in his graphic design studio was like rub down type, right? There were these sheets of letters and you would get, oh, this is a Helvetica sheet or this is an Arial sheet. And you would literally have this little pen with a metal ball and you would like do a mock-up by rubbing down type on this thing. Like,
yeah,
and you can imagine with the rise of desktop computing, were the designers back in the day that was like, well, I'm the one that wants to rub down type. No, you don't want to freaking rub down type.
Yeah. If you think about how many years ago was that?
That was like 45 years ago.
Okay. So 45 years ago. Now let's think 45 years into the future. This conversation, we might be like, I cannot believe back then we would manually design these boxes and pixels and add words into them. and have to change all the colors for different states, right? It's so interesting because when we think, I love these historical examples because they help us contextualize the now. And I think about 45 years into the future, goodness, what are we even doing at that point? And what would seem ludicrous that we're even doing now, right?
So many things come to mind. First of all, there's the actual product experiences. Forget about just design of like having to remember all of our passwords.
Yep.
I think, the power of AI is not just in witty or somewhat accurate large language model text responses, but actually in using multivariate sensor data about you. To, like right now, when I wear this device, it automatically opens other devices nearby. And imagine like that with AI using the acoustics of my voice, I think our great grandkids or grandkids are going to say, wait, you had to remember passwords in this somewhere? Like, what's a password? That's amazing, right? And just think about how much pain and friction that's going to remove from our experiences.
But if you think about the current product development organization, let's just think about that context. Back then, that same example, there were certain tasks or workflows that made sense back then, but not anymore. Now, I think we're going through another fundamental shift of teams and companies trying to make sense of what does that future product development function even look like?
Yeah.
So curious from your perspective, what are some maybe 2-3 key shifts that might be unfolding of how we might design the next generation product development organization?
I think there's two things that come to mind. One is behavior is a really powerful space that hasn't been fully adopted or explored by design. But behavior is at the fundamental root of a lot of human activity. And you could argue, actually, from a design perspective, really what we're trying to do with design is influence, nudge, encourage a different kind of behavior, or remove behaviors that are taking time or adding friction or frustration. And let me give you an example, like the world of economics, I'm sure has been evolving. I'm not an economist. I don't really know, but I understand that the conversation about economics has fundamentally shifted in the last decade or two as it moves away from a model that thinks about the rational human making just, mathematical like decisions and recognizing actually humans are sometimes irrational, they're emotional, but maybe that's predictive. And this whole world of behavioral economics has emerged as a powerful source that is being used everywhere, not just in the world of business, but in the world of social impact and philanthropy. Like, if we really want to elevate the status of, women in this country, what are the conditions that have to change with relationships in the household or relationships in society? What are the behaviors that need to adjust? So number one, I feel like as we have conversation about AI, we're going to think about more human questions that are strategic around behavior. And then the second one is, I think future designers will look back on this era and say, you didn't really pay attention to how people were feeling. You just cared about what they looked at and the actions they took. You just thought of them as a functional thing. Like, even the language we use, we call people consumers, customers, users. We define humans by their economic or functional interface with us, not as a human being with feelings and emotions and hopes and dreams. What would it look like to do product development in the future where the end result is not an improved login flow? It's how people feel greeted and encouraged every time they connect with us. What is that like? And how would we measure emotion? And what are the behaviors that we would encourage to get through that? So in fact, I feel like if we're to save the human race from the dangers of AI, we have to have the design conversation around ethics, around humanity and empathy and emotion and behavior. And if that's true, if the human-centered design is kind of the antidote to the fears of AI, which I believe it is, then product development is actually going to start more with design than it will with, currently it starts more with MBA-like business types who kind of know tech, or a functional tech conversation. What would it be like to start product development from a human perspective?
Right. So it's almost saying there's a bit of a paradigm shift. And I think, there's been rumblings of many conversations as AI has helped encourage a new conversation on what the future PMs look like, what the future of engineering looks like, and what the future of design looks like, and data functions. And so I'm curious kind of where you stand on the evolution of this, because, we know by and large today, most designers report into a product function.
They do.
Where do you kind of stand on this shift, given what you said and the observations we've seen in the market?
We are going to have people reporting into CEOs across the board, whether it's the S&P 500, the FTSE 100, the Fortune 5000. Like, we are absolutely going to have chief officers whose role is to look after, shepherd, and have ultimate executive accountability for this thing called experience or design and or ethics around it. When companies begin to fail in using AI in ways that are unintentionally unethical in probably most cases. We've seen so many case studies of technology and AI that has been kind of replicated the biases of our current culture. And so issues of racism and sexism and, just are kind of come through those tools. Companies are going to be held accountable in much the same way we've seen a dramatic rise in chief sustainability officers reporting to CEOs to help companies gain accountability of their climate footprint. Imagine as AI starts to, falter in some cases, companies are going to have to respond and say, okay, I've got a czar of ethics, experience, whatever, to ensure that our technology is only used in ways that benefits our customers.
Let's add a kind of a catalyst here. So, one thing you and I were talking about, and I think just generally observed, is the current AI revolution is largely driven by technologists, right? Scientists. We're kind of at that, early onset of this fundamental general adoption of Gen AI technologies. And there's been other AI technologies, but there's also new ones coming. So what are your thoughts on what this future experience executive looks like from a skills and competency standpoint? Because I think design is going to really change. I think we need to change, but we also know these next gen experiences rely on a technical understanding as well, right? Large language models, data, etc. So, but then there's also the human ethics and philosophy side of what are our values? What do we want to propagate? What emotions? Let's talk a little bit about, what those next generation skills and, development areas are.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Many of the C-suite today and the background of CEOs tends to be somewhat, I would say, conservative. Like you have chief operating officers, chief financial officers, right? Chief strategy officers. Like a lot of these roles are meant to kind of protect and preserve the fundamental finances and operations and mechanics of a business. But as we think about even the AI disruption around chief operating offices, right, or chief financial offices, I think we're going to start to have, to me, the whole idea of tools in general, whether it's AI or other tools in tech, is what they end up doing, like the rub down type, is just raising the bar on the kind of activities that we want to spend as human beings. And if you imagine Maslow's hierarchy of needs as the kind of things you do at work, I mean, I think we all hope that we can spend, yes, some beautiful time in the details and craft where we want to and where we need to. But we're all trying to really get to those higher levels of activity where we have confidence in the more repeatable, ordinary things being taken over by technology. And we spend more of our time on extraordinary things. And the extraordinary things ultimately the question is, what is the purpose of this organization? What is the purpose of this business? That's what chief strategy officers ask, right? That's what the chief strategy officer of Lloyd's was asking in an era of neobanks like Revolut, Starling, Monzo. Like, what is the purpose of a Lloyd's institution that has the heritage of 250 plus years? And what do we do that's unique and different what are we going to be doing in 50 years? And I think the skills of being comfortable talking about the ambiguity of society and of people and purpose and meaning are going to become more important.
It really shifts the conversation from just how should we and what should we do to who are we, and how does that
Yes.
who evolve as society and culture evolves.
Yeah.
And I imagine that emotional intelligence, to be self-aware, to ask really uncomfortable questions, and to have critical debates with a group of diverse people while doing it with respect,
Yes.
that feels to me something maybe you're hinting at, of like, what is that emotional intelligence layer of, or maybe even spiritual intelligence layer
Totally.
of our, senior most leaders? Is that kind of what I'm
Totally.
okay.
Totally. I gave a talk 5 years ago about bringing EI into AI, bringing emotional intelligence into artificial intelligence, because I feel like it's a given, if you're a designer in that conversation, to ask the questions about emotion, about humanity, about society. And as a chief design officer, when you're responsible for the entire institution, the entire organization's expression of human-centered design, you naturally have collaborations with the chief diversity officer, the chief sustainability officer, who have these other accountabilities around how we treat societal issues and environmental issues. And I feel like AI to me is accelerating the opportunity for us to have design conversations that still deal with the tactics, but more and more help wrestle with those fundamental spiritual questions. And we've seen all the studies, right? Organizations which have psychological safety, which focus on purpose and meaning, where we show up to work, whether it's digital or physical or virtual, knowing that what we're doing has impact and meaning. Like, we're all craving meaning, whether you're the newest intern of any company or team, or whether you're the CEO of a company or anyone in between. And design has a lot to say about meaning. Design has a lot to say about purpose, because design is closest in many ways to trying to serve the needs of people and bring those to the forefront. And so I think design is naturally positioned, like, who else, if not design leaders, to champion the values of the people we serve and bring that meaning to work. And AI is only going to accelerate that.
I'm curious about, the reality that most design leaders today serve in the tech product development side of things, right? And then there's also the customer experience side of things. So, do you have any kind of thoughts on where that is going, given AI and agent tools that are more widely available? So, what are your thoughts on that CX UX future?
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, there's part of me that believes, I mean, we know the ideal. The ideal is that a design executive is a peer to a technology executive or a strategy executive or a marketing executive, right? I also feel, of course, that the worlds of marketing and advertising, branding and design and experience should all be one. They're the human-centered aspects of how an organization operates. And marketing organizations often are rooted in practices and principles from the 50s. And more modern design groups are rooted in practices and principles that came out of the 70s and 80s. And I feel, but ultimately, that should be one space. Those teams often battle, but they should be friends. I also imagine a world where areas of questions of diversity and sustainability, ultimately, there's going to be a question of, well, we've got this design team that's having these conversations that are more around ethics, meaning, and purpose, broader than just a user or a household. It's going into the societal area. What if those operated together somehow? But then also there's a part of me, the practical side, that says in the next 5 years, we're not going to see those dramatic shifts. What we're really going to see probably is chief technology officers being tasked with wrestling with the rise of generative AI, and those chief technology officers feeling overwhelmed. Like, they were just trying to figure out their API strategy and data analytics, and they still haven't, matured in incumbent companies. And so they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. So they'll say, well, these are human questions. Like, maybe we should bring in someone to head up experience or design. So I think in the short term, we're going to probably see technology executives and teams take the forefront more than product, I would say. And so, but we'll see. I still feel like it's an imbalance when you have the design conversation tucked under tech, or the design conversation tucked under product or business. They need to be peer conversations.
Yeah. So I know you and I probably talk to a lot of varying design executives across industry. What do you currently see as really a development area for design executives? Like, where do we really need to grow ourselves? Is it more on the technology side, the business side? Is it the emotional? Like, where do you see some of the biggest gaps today as we steer to this next gen future?
One of the most challenging issues, and maybe I'm just being more self-reflective than, looking at the industry, but one of the hardest things to do is to know when to really champion a new way of thinking, because design executives often bring a unique set of perspectives to the areas that they operate in. They usually have a different profile when it comes to risk, or they take different risks based on, passion for people and passion for a human-centered approach. And, it's really interesting because often they're not equipped to speak the language of the business they're in. They don't have an MBA. Maybe they didn't study computer science. So, they're not fully respected in the worlds of tech or the worlds of business necessarily. Like one example was when I was at Lloyd's. I'm an American Silicon Valley, white glasses wearing designer, right? Like I'm definitely not your typical British banker. And they loved that about me. And they were like, Dan, we want all of your creativity and your design in the honeymoon phase. And then as I was like shining a spotlight on how things really had to change to really become design centered, they were like, oh, that's uncomfortable. And so then the question for me is like, well, do I push even harder? Because if I don't push, we're not going to get where we need to get. And I realized that the way through that was to actually learn a new language. Like when you visit a new country, you get out Duolingo or a little pocket guide and you learn some phrases to get around. So for example, I learned the language of risk, which is the language of banking. And my risk committee is the one that had the biggest impact actually in moving the needle at Lloyd's, because we would say it's a risk to build software without the context of the people we're designing it for, because we might build something and waste a lot of time on something that's not useful. But we said it in a language of risk. So instead of me saying, no, listen to me because I'm from Silicon Valley and I'm cool, is never going to work. But trying to learn the language of the business. And leaders are not taught that in design school or otherwise. You have to experience it.
It's almost saying, what is I don't know why I thought of the word love language, but I don't think that's the right word. It's almost like, what's the value hierarchy at the company?
Yeah.
Or what's the totem pole of where value gets created or is prioritized? And it sounds like, risk is that thing. So I think about how every domain area that we operate in, there's a slightly different language or focus area. And so maybe your advice here is, how can design executives get better at that strategic diagnostics of like, how do we speak the right language in the environment I serve so that we can drive design value?
Totally. Okay. And I feel like this, again, is a difficulty. There's a danger. Like there's a bunch of courses emerging for design leaders to, do like MBA, mini MBA 101 kind of stuff, like learn a balance sheet, and like, that's fine. That's good. That's all right. But actually the actual skill that's useful, because I'm never going to actually do what a CFO does or a COO. Like, I mean, it's better to know the basics. That's fine. But really, what we need to do is challenge some of the current assumptions about design that are persistent on the lips of CEOs and their leadership teams, such like, oh, design shouldn't be in this conversation. Just wait for us to figure things out and we'll tell you what, and then you can make it look good. Like essential versions of that. Like if you asked any CEO, what do you think design is? They're not going to define it in the way design leaders define it, as a strategic superpower, just like technology is a strategic superpower, right? They're going to say, oh, the design team, oh, you work under product or tech and you just, you make stuff look good. Like, that's great. I'm not a designer. And what people say by like saying I'm not a designer is like, I'm not engaging. Can you imagine someone saying that with tech? Ask a CEO, hey, what do you think about tech? The tech will say, well, technology is transformative and disruptive to where we're going, right? Like they've never written a line of code in their life. But they don't say, well, I don't know tech. We've got some people that write code somewhere. They think and talk about design as a superpower. We have to elegantly use linguistic jujitsu to really highlight.
Well, here's the thought. So if most CEOs are coming from COO, CFO, succession pipelines, they speak the language of metrics. They speak the language of finance and operating plans. And so one thing we've heard a lot from our board of directors research, in the last quarter at DXC, they all said, you need to speak in measurable terms. Yeah. Now, what we just talked about earlier about emotional intelligence, spirit is not as measurable. Granted, it's important. So one of the reflections I'm kind of curious of where you think is, what is that kind of financial acumen that might protect us and increase our ability to actually then bring the emotional, spiritual dimensions to enhancing strategic clarity, right?
I mean, some of the most important things in this life aren't particularly measurable in the way that we think about it.
Right.
Like love. Like, are you really going to choose your life partner on a weighted spreadsheet of variables? Like, yeah, maybe there's some people out there that do that, right? But like, really, some of the most important decisions we make in life around faith,
Right.
or
Right.
a partner in life, or should I have children, or like, whatever it is, like these deep, profound, life-changing, meaningful things are not things we ring through an abacus to figure out. They're things that we use our skills of intuition and empathy and creativity, and we advise and consult. So I think we need to also recognize that these conversations about purpose and meaning and experience and emotion, while we may not have measures today, it's still important to measure. Like, take NPS. Let's not go down that rabbit hole necessarily, but NPS, Net Promoter Score, is a widely used business metric. But essentially, it's just people answering the question of, would you recommend this to family and friends? Which is a measure of trust. And if you ask people before NPS was created, can you measure trust? People are like, oh no, trust is impossible to measure. It's like, well, I think there are these sense and signs of deeper spiritual experiences that you can measure with the right question, but you need to have the curiosity of the leadership team to know that it's important enough to even try.
So I think maybe there's a kind of ending note on this segment of the question is, like, there is an importance on that, emotional, satisfactory kind of experience. Now, the question is, how do we instrument the right measurements to reinforce that value of the business, right? And so that's a good question that leaves maybe all of us pondering a little bit.
Yeah. And there are dangers in over measurement. Like, I love Amazon and a lot of what they do and how focused they are on A/B testing and analytics and all that. And they've pushed all of us, right, in new ways. But when we've all used Amazon, and I think if we all reflected on how really easy is it to find information about a product, we would all say, like, why the hell do you have to scroll 3, 4, 5 folds or screens to get to basic information? And the reason for that is doing that makes everything else perform well, because you're forced to kind of experience more of the, and so, like, if their product managers are, rewarded and incentivized on the usage and engagement of features, they can very easily make design decisions that don't actually help people with the thing they're trying to do, which is, I want to spend less time with you. I want to spend less time scrolling. I want to, right? But this whole mindset of product management is like feature, use. But that the purpose of meaning and the conversations about purpose and meaning gets you to a place where you're like, well, maybe happiness doesn't mean more stuff or more menu options or more buttons. Maybe, like, what are we trying to create and how do we measure that? Because if we don't use measurement in the right way, we'll create Frankenstein confusing things that incentivize the wrong things.
I'm thinking a lot about, how every public company is accountable to these quarterly results as much as their annual results, and then how that cycle affects thinking and the decision making that we want to make and the horizons of it. So it kind of, I think maybe there's a thought I'm having here about just like with AI, it's one of those other disruptive tools, and we've gone through many cycles of major tech changes. But fundamentally, I think there's a question here for how CEOs of the world, how boards of the world are planning that next phase of their company's transformation. What voices should be in that room? What new metrics may need to emerge? Is this new kind of playbook on, the AI-enabled company?
I think companies around the world are being asked to think about themselves, their meaning, their purpose, their value at higher levels. And those companies that have more of a traditional corporate structure have certain limitations because shareholder value and financial results are primary. Yep. But we're seeing that change. We're seeing the concept of a triple bottom line, not just profits, but the 3 Ps of profits, or prosperity is a better even way to say that, people and the planet, right? So there's ESG measures around thinking about how a company has an impact in the world that's beyond just the numbers. And it's striking to me that the world's largest company, Walmart, Fortune 1, where I was head of design for a bit, their chief sustainability officer really thought about business as a way of serving society over the long term, not just making money for the shareholders, but solving a need in the world, like having a meaningful product or service that people value. And I feel like there are emerging models of things like a B Corp, a benefit corporation, who, as part of its charter and principles, is not just there to have, one-sided financial results, but actually is there to benefit society. I see there's community benefit societies here in the UK. There's a number of these institutions which are starting to weave principles of design, knowingly or unknowingly, into their very charter. And those companies have, I think, new tools at their disposal to measure and think about their success.
As we're trying to, looking forward to making sense of this era, are there key thinkers, leaders that you're kind of looking to make sense of this era?
I mean, I've always looked back to a leader who's my hero, Dr. Liz Sanders. Dr. Liz Sanders she comes from that kind of anthropology and sociology world. But she's one of the few folks in that world who has practiced in the world of design. And she's been a constant reminder to us that there is no such thing as experience design. There's design for experience, where the experience that people have is their own, and we are kind of in humble service posture to that. She also kind of believes that it's not just companies that can create. She believes all people are creative. And Bob McKim, who is a Stanford, the late Stanford professor around creativity, has proven this. What would it look like for this thing called a business to actually involve the participation and creativity and hopes and dreams of the people who normally think of just consumers, who it's a one-way thing. I produce, you consume. Well, think about things like, I don't know, Facebook or social media. Those are empty vessels. Minus my content and my relationships are empty. There's nothing there. I'm actually the producer of social media because it's me and my relationships, which actually brings life to it. And so my work at creating a modular phone at Google had this idea that what if anybody can contribute to this thing called a smartphone and build actual hardware to make it unique? So I feel like that gets me excited because in a world where anybody can create with generative AI tools, like people are going to be able to create an app on a weekend in their pajamas as a high schooler using AI tools. They're not going to need to hire expensive developers and designers, right? In a world where anyone can create, you harness technology to create value, then, these notions of meaning, purpose, society, roles, we get to rethink those. And to me, that's not scary. That's exciting because there's so many problems in the world to solve, and let's get AI helping us to solve those.
Well, Dan, this was a awesome discussion to kind of unpack your views on AI. Certainly, there's a lot of unresolved questions I think we'll need more research and time to discuss, from our emotional intelligence, our spirituality, to new metrics for the AI era, to even the role of learning as design leaders how to speak the language of the business, right? To end this here, any movie, book, story that gives you inspiration for a better future on humans, machines?
Movies, books, or stories. It's so hard because so many science fiction narratives around the use of AI are dystopian and scary and freaky. Well, okay, how about this? I'm going to harken back to some of my first narratives in television around science fiction. And maybe because they were they're from the 70s and 80s, maybe they were really naive, but I still feel like so many things from Star Trek have actually happened. Like, the idea of a cell phone and instant communication was envisioned. I'm actually really proud that when I was at Motorola and our team created the first Hey Moto experience, which when Google bought Motorola, they said, hey, can you make a change and turn that into Hey Google? we created that experience as the first time outside of Star Trek a human being could naturally talk to a device and it would respond back in useful ways. But that pattern was shown decades earlier in Star Trek. And so
Mm.
often when I see technology being used in Star Trek for medical diagnostics, for communication, for solving complex physics problems
Yeah,
on a starship, like that's how I want technology to be used.
right. It's so fun. Just to end it here, I just started the Dune Prophecy series, and I find Dune another alternative universe where they eliminate what they call thinking machines, or aka AI. And so it's really interesting between
Interesting.
Star Trek and Dune, very different universes of humanity and machine. So I'll end it there. Lots for us to think about. Dan, it was such a pleasure having you here. Thanks so much for coming on
Likewise.
the DXC stage.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.